press conference. After I speak and give some opening comments, I'll be followed by Marvin Rotrand, who's our National Director of the League for Human Rights, followed by David Matus, who is our Senior Legal Counsel. And we are fortunate to be joined by three members of Parliament today who represent three different political parties who will be invited to say a few words as well. So following Mr. Matus is going to be, first of all, Anthony Housefather, who's Member of Parliament for Mount Royal and the Liberal Party. Then Melissa Lantsman, Member of Parliament for Thornhill from the Conservatives, followed by Randall Garrison, Member of Parliament for Esquimalt Saanich-Sooke, New Democratic Party. Since 1982, the League for Human Rights has been monitoring and reporting anti-Semitic incidents in our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. It has been reflected through nowadays our anti-hate app, but also our anti-hate hotline. And it covers anti-Semitic incidents that both meet the criminal code threshold and fall below the criminal code threshold. It is unfortunate that I have to report that last year, in the year 2021, there were 2,799 recorded incidents of anti-Semitism. This represents the fourth consecutive year that the 2,000 plateau in numbers has been exceeded. This is the sixth consecutive record-setting year and represents a 7.2% increase compared to the 2020 numbers. That, just to give it a little bit of perspective, is almost 8 anti-Semitic incidents that have been recorded every single day in 2021. What was very disturbing was an over 733% increase of violent incidents in 2021. This went from 9 incidents in total for the entire year in 2020 to 75 in 2021. Much of it driven by violence that followed the Hamas-Israel conflict in the month of May. And this is deeply disturbing to Canadian Jewry that anti-Israel demonstrators, many showing support for listed terrorist organizations like Hamas, may have felt that physically or violently assaulting individuals on Canadian streets may carry little consequence. Our audit tracks 3 different categories of numbers: harassment, vandalism, and violence. There were 2,460 acts of harassment, which is a almost 1% decrease from last year. Vandalism, 264 incidents nationally, which represents a 123% increase. And as already mentioned, violence, 75 incidents, a 733% increase. In-person harassment actually decreased by 40% approximately, where online increased about 12.3%, perhaps not so surprising given that it was COVID times heavily during 2020. So I'd now like to turn over to Marvin Rotrand, our National Director for the League for Human Rights, who will go further into the numbers and give us a bit of a regional breakdown. Marvin.
Bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom est Marvin Rotrand. Je suis le directeur national de la Ligue des droits de la personne de B'nai Brith, Canada. D'abord, je me remercie nos invités, les députés Anthony Housefather, le député Melissa Lantsman et M. Randall Garrison, qui représentent 3 provinces différentes du Québec, l'Ontario et la Colombie-Britannique. Merci pour être avec nous ce matin. J'aimerais dire en français un peu ce que Michael Mostyn a dit en anglais. Les chiffres ne mentent pas. Cette année, pour la 6e année ensuite, il y a une augmentation des incidences qui a ciblant des incidences haineuses qui a ciblant les Juifs et l'augmentation est 7,2% en rapport à 2020. Il y était 2799 incidents, une augmentation de 189, dont le numéro enregistré en 2020 était 2610. La vraie histoire est que c'est pire que ça paraît à la première vue. Comme Michael a dit, l'augmentation des incidents violents a augmenté de 9 à 75, c'est-à-dire une augmentation de 733%. En 2017 à 2021, le nombre des incidents de violence, le chiffre cumulatif était seulement 61, c'est-à-dire 2021 a produit plus des incidents violents que toutes les 5 ans avant. J'aimerais vous faire le bilan par province. Il y a 36 incidents violents ciblant les Juifs au Québec en 2021, 25 en Ontario, 7 à Manitoba, 5 en Alberta et 2 en la Colombie-Britannique. Je suis pas près de vous dire que Québec était le pire cette année, mais malheureusement, c'était exactement ce qui est arrivé. Le nombre des incidents au Québec a augmenté de 686 en 2020 à 828 en 2021, une augmentation de 20,7%. L'Ontario est 60% plus populeux que le Québec, mais le Québec est arrivé en première place pour les incidents antisémites en 2021. The breakdown of the provinces is quite interesting because it shows us there are different trends in different parts of the country. The increase in anti-Semitic incidents in 2021 was driven mostly in 4 provinces. British Columbia, where the number of incidents rose from 194 to 409, an increase of 110%. Alberta, where the number of incidents went from 95 to 149, or 55% increase. As I've mentioned, Quebec, we have to be prudent about. The number of incidents went from 686 to 828. As mentioned before, 20.7% more incidents, but making Quebec the province with the most number of incidents. And finally, equally troubling is Manitoba, where the number of incidents went from 99 to 223, over 120% increase. On the other hand, we see that incidents actually decreased in several provinces. In Ontario, 2020 produced 1,120 incidents. That went down to 821 in 2021. Still far too many, but a decrease of almost 28%. But we should note 2 troubling trends in Ontario. There were 25 violent incidents, an increase from 3 in 2020, and the number of cases of vandalism shot up from 68 to 156. And so while the global number is lower, there are troubling trends even within Ontario. In the Maritimes, happily, we have seen a large decrease. The numbers went from 199 for the 4 maritime provinces to only 80 in 2021. Prince Edward Island registered 0 incidents. Nova Scotia, 6. Newfoundland and Labrador, 27, and New Brunswick, 47. While that number from New Brunswick may raise eyebrows, it's still far lower than the number registered in 2020 in New Brunswick. The trends changed as well. Mr. Mostyn mentioned that in-person harassment has gone down. In fact, it decreased from 600 incidents in 2020 to 365. We attribute that largely to COVID restrictions. When people were basically quarantined or not able to be out in public as much, it decreased the opportunity for in-person harassment. On the other hand, it fed a trend that we have been seeing for the last 5 years, a growth of vile, hateful online hate targeting Jews. That went up from 1,678 incidents in 2020 to 1,825. And again, reinforces something B'nai Brith has said for a long time. We need to modernize our legislation to address online hate. Many of the incidents happened during the month of May 2021 during the Hamas-Israel conflict. In fact, 22.3% of all incidents during the year, or 623, happened in May. And many of the violent incidents occurred in the month of May. There are many reports of peaceful rallies, pro-Israel rallies, where Jews and others were attacked by those who were spouting anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and anti-Jewish slogans, and often throwing rocks and other bric-a-brac. And there were 17 arrests in the month of May for these violent incidents. And that wasn't the worst of it. 2 other individuals were arrested in Côte-Saint-Luc, Quebec, driving around threatening Jewish people during the month of May. 30% of all the incidents in Ontario were during the month of May. 25% of all of those, of the year's total in Quebec, were in the month of May. And while the average, as I said, is 22.3%, what is troubling to me is the province of British Columbia, which only registered 15% of its total anti-Semitic incidents in May, meaning it has a generalized problem throughout the year. J'aimerais dire que nous avons déjà averti le gouvernement du Québec. Nous avons parlé au ministre Benoît Charest. On essaie de convaincre le gouvernement du Québec de faire plus. On appréciait énormément la motion de l'Assemblée nationale qui est adoptée en 26 mai 2021, où l'Assemblée, à la unanimité, a dénoncé les actes contre les Juifs, la haine contre les Juifs, la violence contre les Juifs. Et également, le 9 juin dernier, le ministre Charest se lève dans l'Assemblée nationale pour effectivement dire que le gouvernement du Québec appuie la définition de l'antisémitisme de l'Alliance internationale pour la mémoire de l'Holocauste. Nous avons reçu une lettre de le chef du Bloc québécois, M. Yves-François Blanchette, il y a un mois, qui disant sa formation également appuie cette définition. It's important for us to know that the government of Quebec and the Bloc Québécois, as a party that represents Quebec, have joined their voices to other provinces such as Ontario and other parties to support the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. So let me conclude by saying, while the numbers are shocking, 2021 also gave a great deal of hope. The uptick of anti-Semitism provoked the government of Canada to act. We welcome and appreciate the National Summit on Anti-Semitism that was held in July 2021, which put at the same table citizens, Jewish community groups, government agencies, elected officials to talk about a long-term action plan to counter anti-Semitism. We appreciate that Prime Minister Trudeau led the Canadian delegation at the Malmo International Conference to preserve Holocaust remembrance and combat anti-Semitism, and that the Government of Canada made a strong pledge to reaffirm our commitment to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and Canada's membership in the organization. Finally, we want to recognize the making permanent of the position of Special Envoy for preserving Holocaust remembrance as a post of government for the long term, and we welcome the nomination of Erwin Kotler to that post. Merci beaucoup, mesdames et messieurs. Thank you very much. I call on David Matus, Senior Legal Counsel for B'nai Brith, to take the floor.
Thank you very much. I want briefly to make 4 points. One is the big difference in numbers between the anti-Semitic police-reported hate crimes published by Statistics Canada and anti-Semitic incidents in the B'nai Brith Canada audit. Police-reported hate crimes are the tip of the iceberg. Police-reported anti-Semitic hate crimes represent about 12% of total incidents. Je veux faire voir 4 points. L'un est la grande différence dans les chiffres entre les crimes haineux antisémites signalés par la police, publiés par Statistique Canada, et les incidents antisémites dans l'audit de B'nai Brith Canada. Les crimes de haine antisémite signalés par la police représentent environ 12% du nombre de incident total. Moreover, the audit reported incidents are themselves an undercount. The audit does not include in the total every incident reported to B'nai Brith. There's a verification process for every incident reported to B'nai Brith. Incidents not verified are not included in the audit count, and not every incident comes to the attention of B'nai Brith. A second point, one that jumps out from the 2020 Statistics Canada report, is per capita victimization. If we look at crimes motivated by religious hatred, the Jewish community leads the list of victims in absolute numbers. If we look at the list of hate crimes by all motivations, the Black community has suffered the most in terms of total number of crimes for which they are victims. The Jewish community comes second. However, the Black community in Canada is substantially larger than the Jewish community, almost 4 times the size of the Jewish population. The Jewish community in 2020 was the minority community in Canada with the largest number of victims of hate crimes per capita by far for all minorities. The incidence of Jewish victimization is a multiple of the victimization of the other minority communities. If you are Jewish, you are more likely to be a victim of a hate crime by far than if you are a member of any other minority. La communauté juive en 2020 était de loin la communauté minoritaire au Canada avec le plus grand nombre de victimes de crimes haineux par habitant pour toutes les minorités. The Statistics Canada per capita victimization figures for the Jewish community as compared to other minority communities is likely to be even higher for 2021 than in 2020. Though we do not yet have the overall hate crime statistics for 2021 for all minority communities, a main reason for the jump in figures for incidents against the Jewish community in 2021, as you've heard, is anti-Semitic Canadian reaction to the Gaza conflict in May of that year. That conflict led to attacks on Jewish communities worldwide. This phenomenon is something other communities do not and did not experience. The third and related point worth noting is the substantial anti-Zionist component of anti-Semitic incidents. Of the 74 violent incidents in the audit report for 2021, which is being released now, 63 occurred in the month of May, the month of the Gaza conflict. Le troisième point connexe qui mérite d'être noté est l'importante composante antisioniste des incidents antisémites. Pour les 74 incidents violents signalés par l'audit en 2021, 63 se sont produits au mois de mai, le mois de conflit à Gaza. A fourth point that the audit notes is the surge in 2021 of anti-Semitic incidents on university campuses. There's a direct link between this surge and the widespread resistance in universities to the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. That definition gives several examples of anti-Semitism, some of which are linked to anti-Zionism. It is those examples that have generated the resistance in universities to adoption of this definition. It's a matter of common sense that once you exclude whole categories of attacks on Jews as not anti-Semitic, which is what universities are now doing by rejecting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, that anti-Semitic incidents will mushroom. This is what we are now seeing on university campuses. The governments of Ontario, Quebec, and Canada have all adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. The effective combat against anti-Semitism in Canada means that universities have to do so as well. Un quatrième point que l'audit note est le bond en 2021 des incidents antisémites sur les campus universitaires. Les gouvernements de l'Ontario, du Québec et du Canada ont tous adopté la définition d'antisémitisme de l'Alliance internationale pour la mémoire de l'Holocauste. La lutte efficace contre l'antisémitisme au Canada signifie que les universités doivent faire de même. Merci. Thank you.
Bonjour, moi je suis Anthony Housefather, je suis le député de Mont-Royal sur l'île de Montréal. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui et je remercie beaucoup à Michael, à David et à Marvin et à Brith pour ce travail qui est incroyablement important parce que quand vous regardez ce rapport, c'est impossible de ne pas constater que l'antisémitisme est un problème grave aujourd'hui au Canada. I'm also very pleased to be here today with my colleagues, Melissa Landsman from the Conservative Party and Randall Garrison from the NDP. Tackling anti-Semitism and all forms of hate in Canada has to be a nonpartisan issue. Last year, there were 3 forms of hate that I particularly want to signal that came to my attention over and over and over again. We've heard about the Hamas-Israel conflict last May. In my riding of Mount Royal, I have never seen a greater upsurge of anti-Semitism. I personally witnessed the car that is referred to in the B'nai Brith report that drove up and down Kildare Road in my riding in Mount Royal in the city of Côte-Saint-Luc, screaming insults, epithets, and kill the Jews, kill the Jews. It was shocking, and hundreds of children were witness to this because that's a very busy street and everybody came out to look. It was a time when I had families that asked me whether they could bring their kids safely to our neighborhood park wearing a kippah. I had elderly residents, Holocaust survivors, asking if they should take the mezuzah off their doors. That should not happen in Canada. I heard from a number of students, that's the second thing, that they felt uncomfortable revealing their Jewish identity at CEGEPs and universities. That is completely unacceptable. And finally, with disinformation online, we see more and more hate against Jews and all other groups. But I'm just going to raise the fact that I had the honor of sitting with Randall and Melissa's colleague Marty Morantz on an international task force tackling anti-Semitism online. And disinformation, whether related to Russians' disinformation on Ukraine, whether related to disinformation on vaccination, whether related to disinformation from QAnon or any other subject, it always ends up somehow being about Jews. And we need to tackle that. Donc, comment est-ce qu'on va le faire? Donc, B'nai Brith vous a cité déjà que le gouvernement du Canada, le gouvernement d'Ontario, le gouvernement du Québec, le gouvernement de plusieurs municipalités à travers le Canada ont adopté la définition d'antisémitisme de l'Alliance internationale de la mémoire de l'Holocauste. La ville de Montréal ne l'a pas encore fait. Je demande à l'administration de Valérie Plante d'adopter cette définition. Je demande à toutes les universités à travers le Québec and all the universities across Canada to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. I would also say that I'm very pleased, as Marvin highlighted, that we've made the Office of the Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Remembrance permanent. We've provided funding for the next 5 years. We've also announced that we're going to, in the Budget Implementation Act, ensure that Holocaust denial is made illegal in Canada, is made criminal in Canada, other than in private conversation. That is really important. And we have to find the right way to tackle hate and disinformation online. So I am pleased to be able to work with my colleagues in other parties who share the same passion and the same commitment to get anti-Semitism and hate out of our society. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks so much. I'm Melissa Landsman, a member of Parliament for Thornhill. Thank you very much, Anthony, and joined here by Randall, 2 very bright spots in their own respective caucuses, and I know 2 colleagues that are as committed to this as I am. First off, I want to thank B'nai Brith, Michael, Martin, David for sharing this sobering report. And it's alarming that year after year, we see a different picture, and it's not one that actually improves, but one that should give pause to every single Canadian today. There is a rising tide of anti-Semitism in this country, in my community, in Anthony's community, and in communities across the country, as you heard. And it's not just rising out of far right internet chat rooms. It's rising out of faculty clubs, out of university classrooms, out of social justice organizations, and far too many government offices. And the public displays of hate last May across this country yielded little to no action. And they are shocking. And they continue to happen. It was unacceptable to see a flag of the Hamas terror group at an anti-Israel protest in Toronto. Remember, Hamas calls for the genocide of the Jews in its charter, and these flags are openly waving in the streets of Toronto. Taliban flags openly waved at anti-Israel protests in Mississauga, in a country that went to war to free the Afghan people from this deadly terrorist regime. An anti-Israel manual sent out by the largest school board in the country. And when kids playing hockey at the Avenue Road Ducks face anti-Jewish hate in the largest organized sports league in the country, we've got a problem. Or the countless swastikas drawn on schools, on playgrounds, in parks, and on homes. And I'm sure you see it in your own community. I saw it during our last federal election to a degree that I've never seen it before. Or the open display of anti-Semitism in our streets just yesterday in Toronto, where at a pro-Palestinian rally, they cheered enthusiastically for rocket attacks on civilians in Israel. Anti-Semitism dressed up as anti-Zionism is what we are seeing a rise in, an anti-Jewish statehood. And any suggestion that the two are separate is very much part of the problem. We must be unrelenting in calling it out. And I'm happy to see some of the steps the government has taken, and we need to do more. The International Holocaust Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism has been agreed and adopted by democracies across the world, including this one. And the IRA definition is important for understanding anti-Semitism for what it is and what it is not. And for Jewish communities and all communities, it's vitally important. But what's concerning, I think, is the lack of uptake on campuses and in cities that hinder the impact, for example, on what police departments' hate crimes units and understanding that powerful deterrents are actually needed when anti-Semitism is on the rise. Because without using the definition, it's just a definition. It's just a piece of paper. So to sum it up, and I know that Anthony spoke about the experiences that he saw, classical or modern, new or old, anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism, and it's one of the ugliest manifestations of racism. And I hope that today's report from B'nai Brith, which I know many people worked very hard on putting together, was as sobering for you as it was to me. And I hope that it ensures that the government take this seriously and act in a way that we don't see this again in this country. We should never see this in Canada. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Randall Garrison, Member of Parliament for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke and a member of the New Democratic Party caucus. And as somebody who arrived at 3 a.m. this morning from British Columbia, I'm happy to be here. But I'm also happy to be here to stand for all those British Columbians who are shocked by the record of the increase in anti-Semitism in British Columbia in the past year. So I want to start again by thanking B'nai Brith for this annual audit, which has become such a valuable tool in promoting human rights in Canada by shining a light on anti-Semitism. It is both important and disturbing to read this year's report, which demonstrates so clearly the continuing increase in anti-Semitic hate and violence in Canada. And again, I note that particularly steep increase in my home province of British Columbia and in my own community of Victoria. Indeed, I was sad to see two incidents in my own community highlighted in this report, one of those in my own riding. That incident saw particularly hateful graffiti scrawled on the Chabad Center, and this was done on the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, no less. I remember very clearly how inadequate I felt when I phoned Rabbi Kaplan that morning to offer whatever support I could. And I applaud all of those who worked so hard to ensure that there was accountability for this incident, and that accountability was driven by education rather than vengeance. So I applaud the Jewish community and I applaud the Victoria Police for their fine work in combating this incident. But it's not the rule, it's the exception where this is done. This incident reminded me of the importance of recommitting to the work I do as an MP in combating anti-Semitism. I do so as an active member of the Interparliamentary Task Force on Combating Anti-Semitism Online with Anthony and Marty Morantz, and also by serving as vice chair of the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group, which is, by coincidence, hosting a delegation of Knesset members here this week. As a gay man, I have to note the parallel increase in hatred and violence directed at my own community, but I also want to note a significant difference between anti-gay and anti-Semitic hatred in Canada. and that is the growing indifference to anti-Semitism in the mainstream of Canadian political and community life. In particular, those who profess to be, quote, pro-Palestinian now feel free to use their opposition to the right of Israel to exist and its right to defend itself as a way to attempt to limit the participation of Jewish Canadians in public and community life. This has been particularly alarming to see on post-secondary campuses where I spent my career before coming to Parliament, and it must be unacceptable there and everywhere else. And when it comes to the IRA definition, which I do support, the question I have to people who question the definition is, do you question the right of blacks to define anti-black racism? Do you question the right of Asian Canadians to define anti-Asian racism? Then why, if you do not, do you question the right of the Jewish community to define what constitutes anti-Semitism? So yes, we need better legislation to combat anti-Semitic hate and violence, and I will continue to push the Liberal government and my colleagues to get that job done. And particularly now that the Conference and Supply Agreement has given us some stability in Parliament, we need Parliament to get busy on getting that job done. But we also need community leaders from all faiths and none to speak out against anti-Semitism and its normalization. I'm a particular fan of naming and shaming. This report provides the stark evidence of the urgent need for all of us to do so. I thank B'nai Brith once again for the important foundation their work provides in combating anti-Semitism and promoting human rights in Canada. Thank you.
Okay, so those are all the formal remarks. So if there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them now.
First question in the room.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mari Wolf from the Canadian Press. I just wondered if you could say a little more about the discrepancy between incidents in the provinces, and particularly in Quebec and British Columbia, which I have to say I found surprising, as you did, Randall.
If you will give me your email right after the conference, I'll actually send you the complete breakdown by type of incidents in British Columbia. We noticed in British Columbia that incidents were fairly uniform throughout the year. It wasn't a spike in a particular month like it was in Ontario or Quebec, where May stands out as disproportionate. In BC, there's a problem. The number of total incidents has risen the last couple of years, but this year, it went up 110%. It went up from 194 incidents in 2020 to 409 incidents. Happily, if I can use that term, there were only 2 violent incidents in British Columbia, as opposed to 36 in Quebec. But there were a lot of cases of vandalism. Mr. Garrison mentioned the case where there was vandalism desecrating the Chabad Center in his riding in the Greater Victoria area, where there were actually arrests made, but it turned out to be juveniles. The community actually preferred to work towards restorative justice rather than criminal charges. And I like to think there was a learning experience for the individuals involved, as well as a sense of satisfaction in the community that they were able to be part of what was a broader solution. But however, there's just way too many incidents in British Columbia that are questionable. Nathan Cullen is the Minister of Municipal Affairs in British Columbia. He also happens to be Jewish. I didn't actually know that. His billboards, public billboards, telling people how to reach his office in his riding along Highway 16 were defaced with swastikas and anti-Semitic incidents. And it came up afterwards in the British Columbia legislature, where several members of the legislature rose to say that was unacceptable. That happened at the end of November or the beginning of December. So we're keeping our eye on British Columbia. I've had discussions with Rachna Singh, who is the Minister of the British Columbia government, who's the parliamentary secretary of the British Columbia government, whose mandate includes looking at racism and the response of the government, not only to anti-Semitism, but all forms of hate. And they're very concerned. And we've proposed to the British Columbia government that it adopt the IRA definition that follow Quebec and Ontario. As I said, you'll give me your email. I'll send you all the exact breakdown for British Columbia after the press conference is over.
I mean, could you shed on any light on why this is? I mean, you mentioned, an upsurge during May, and I'd be interested, if it's not too much to ask, whether you felt that, given what's happening in Jerusalem, that you anticipate a similar upsurge, possibly this year.
Well, online has made it easier for the haters to be heard. And we've been seeing that every year, that there's been a doubling in 5 years of complaints about online hate. We're very rigorous about what we actually accept as a valid complaint. And we do talk to police hate crimes units all the time. Some of what we report, they follow up on. Some of which they said they're not sure they can get a conviction. Under the current law, there's a lot of debate about our current hate crimes law and whether it responds to rapidly advancing technologies. Have we fallen behind the curve? I think there's a parliamentary consensus of yes. Question would be ultimately for our elected officials to determine how do we protect free speech while protecting the right of citizens to be not targeted by hate that can actually spur violence. So it's a debate other countries have had, and I think we're seeing a commitment from the government to work towards an eventual bill. I'll let that to the elected officials to ultimately come back to us on, but clearly we're getting more and more complaints about online hate, and we're seeing it in most provinces. The only anomaly this year was New Brunswick, where there had been a large number of online hate incidents in 2020. That decreased massively in 2021, but in every other province it went up.
I have a question online from Sarah Levitt. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, did we just hear another question?
Yes, hi. Sarah Levitt from CBC. Hi, Marvin.
Hi, Sarah. Nice to hear your voice again.
I just wondered, how does the Gaza conflict in May and the protests, the violent crimes affect the numbers this year in a way other years didn't? Okay.
23.2% of all our incidents were recorded in the month of May, 623 out of 2,799. That's far higher than any other month. As David Matus indicated in his discourse, the bulk of the violent incidents were also in the month of May. I want to say that we were very prudent in compilating our audit this year. First of all, I want to say our audit's a definite undercount. Not all incidents are reported to us, but however, while we have very good sources of information, including our app, our website, our hotline, and the reports of 82 police departments that come to us, there are 2 police departments in which we don't have their final statistics. I use the word final, and that is Montreal and Toronto. Toronto wouldn't give us the figures because they're making them public next month about hate crimes in general. We do track what happened in Toronto. We think we have the bulk of what they have recorded, but there might be a couple incidents which we missed that they recorded in the same Montreal. So we're saying it's an undercount. The second reason we're saying it's an undercount is unless we have video proof, somebody throwing rocks, somebody hitting somebody, somebody screaming anti-Semitic, chants, we didn't count it, even though we believe the person who sent us the complaint. When a person said, somebody spat at me at a demonstration and we can't prove it, we didn't count it as a violent incident. We didn't count it as harassment. We just didn't count it. So our numbers are probably an undercount. But having said that, in Toronto and Montreal in particular, but also in Edmonton, Calgary, even St. John's, Newfoundland, demonstrations around the Hamas-Israel conflict generated far more complaints than we've ever had before, and genuine fear in the community. People said they really felt unsafe, and in some incidents we're certain that had the police department not been there, people would have been seriously injured. In Montreal, there are cases of people pelting others with what they said were stones, which are big rocks, which could have really hurt some individual if they'd been hit in the head or something like that. The Hamas conflict brought out anti-Israel demonstrators who called for the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jews. We have that on tape. We have videos of it. We have enough evidence and affidavits about it. It's shocking, and it means we need to do not only more about education, but we need our elected officials to be far more vigorous in speaking out against this sort of stuff. Hamas and the others are banned terrorist organizations. They're illegal in Canada, and I don't mean just illegal flying their flag, but spouting their rhetoric of violence and murder. The solution to finding a way forward in the Middle East does not come by saying kill the Jews and destroy Israel. So clearly there was a problem in May. Could it happen again? Possibly. But however, the government of Canada has to be on the ball. The National Summit on Anti-Semitism in July spotted exactly this, and we have promises from elected officials that bureaucrats and law enforcement will be better educated. The Prime Minister said clearly in October there will be a rollout of the IRA definition through the whole of government, better implementation, better understanding of what it means, and hopefully it will have an impact. I hope that answers your question, Sarah.
Sorry, if I could just add just a little point, too, about what changed in the month of May. Because, as Marvin mentioned, and Melissa and Anthony, the Jewish community really did feel something changed in the month of May. Our community has been complaining for many, many years about incitement that's been taking places on university campuses, and that incitement will, sooner or later, lead to violence. We saw that violence start to emanate in a way our community, a generation of Jews in this country, has never witnessed before. And as Marvin was mentioning, this was national. This wasn't just in Toronto. This wasn't just in Montreal. We saw incidents in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Winnipeg, public displays from those in the crowd. And it wasn't just chanting. It was sometimes at these protests looking out for individual Jews or Israel supporters that had peeled off from the crowd and violently attacking those individuals, about going through Jewish neighborhoods and asking, where are the Jews? People were actually driving around, and again, this was taking place in Edmonton as well. So this was across the country, and very, very disturbing. And it is disturbing that when hatred like this, that we've seen on university campuses, makes its way out into society, that we see such opposition from university administrations to the IRA definition, because the proof and point that IRA is necessary on campus was what took place the last month of May. We certainly hope that it doesn't repeat itself, but the Jewish community is fearful that, in fact, it will.
I could add something to that as well about what's going to happen this May. Well, I mean, what happens in the future really depends on us. And there are some obviously very worrying trends and a lot of people pushing in the opposite direction. But we have heard, and what needs to be done is wider adoption and implementation of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. There needs to be effective legislation about online hate, which we've heard about, but it's kicking around for a long time, needs to be done. I was pleased to see in the budget the banning of Holocaust denial also needs to be done. The figures are alarming. The matter is one of urgency. What happened last May is a warning. And what you're dealing with is a victim community, which, as I've indicated, by the number one, by the figures, is number one per capita. And this problem has to be given a priority, which the figures demonstrate. Thanks.
Follow up? Yeah.
Français ou en anglais? Are there any other questions in English or French?
Sarah, do you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you very much, everyone, for having attended.